Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to get crisp looking text at 720p with OBS Studio, even with old hardware, and how you can do lossless video recordings by using ffmpeg commands in your OBS settings. So first of all, what I'm going to do is scroll down this page so you can have a look and see how this text and images are rendered during the recording. What I've done beforehand is I've resized my 1080p monitor to 720p and I'm recording at 720p. So rather than recording at 1080p and scaling it down, we're setting the monitor to the correct resolution beforehand. So if I just scroll down, you can see how this sort of renders and what the graphics look like and some of the text. So if I just come down here, you can see all this is rendering nicely. It's not compressed like a old JPEG, which is typically what you get when you downsize the video with OBS Studio. So what I'm going to do is come across to the terminal, so you can just see what the text looks like in the terminal and how it's actually rendered. And the reason I'm showing this is because I do a lot of video recordings where I'm demonstrating stuff in the terminal or in a text editor, and what I found is OBS by default, when you set it up, the text rendering is terrible if you downsize the video as you're recording it. So you can see this looks nice and clean. So if I come across to Emacs here, this has had the text enlarged so that you can see it more clearly, but it's also a good test because the text is anti-aliased in my version of in my Emacs setup, so you can actually see how clearly it renders. So what I'm going to do now is actually go through the process of setting up your monitor and OBS Studio to record at 720p instead of 1080p. So I'm using FreeBSD here, Unix, but this would apply to Linux as well. If you're on a Mac or Windows, you'll have a different way of setting the resolution of your external monitor. For instance, on the Mac, I think you have to go into System Preferences, Display, and then you can click a little button that says Scaled, and you can then explicitly set the size of the external monitor. But on Linux and Unix, what we would do is we would use the xrandr command. And if we have a look at the first line here, you can see I'm using xrandr to set the output of my first monitor, my primary display, which is my laptop. So that's EDP-1, and we're setting that as the primary monitor. And now on the next line down here, what we're doing is we're setting the output HDMI 1, which is going to be the external monitor, which is actually a 1080p monitor, and we're setting the mode to 1280 720, and we're setting it to the right of my laptop screen, which is EDP1. Now the third line probably won't apply to you, but this is how I set my wallpaper. In Linux and Unix there's a program called Fay, which allows you to set your wallpaper, and basically the reason this is here is because when you reset the monitor using xrandr, what will happen is if you don't reset your wallpaper, it will kind of tile awkwardly because you've changed the resolution. So what we do on this third line is actually explicitly restart our wallpaper setter, and basically what that does is it ensures that the wallpaper is set correctly in the middle of the screen. So basically what we do, as I said, is we use xrandr, we set the default laptop setup here, and then we set the external monitor to be scaled at 1280 by 720. What I also do is, if I have a look at my zsh-rc file, which is my shell configuration file, I've defined several aliases that I use, such as HDMI on, HDMI off, and HDMI 720. And basically what that does is, the first one, HDMI on, what it does is, when I plug in my external monitor which is a 1080p monitor, I run this HDMI on alias, and what it does is it uses xrandr to set the 1080p monitor to be 1080p and to the right of my laptop screen. As you can see here, we have the alias, and then we define the name, and then equals, in single quotes, the command, and further down here we have the opposite, which is the HDMI off, and again you can see here I reset the wallpaper. So basically this one is another alias, and what it does is, you can see here, we're setting the primary one, then we set the output of the HDMI and we set it to off. And again, this is just the settings after that are just for resetting the wallpaper, so it just resets the wallpaper when I toggle from setting the external monitor to on and off. And the third one up here is the alias that I defined for setting the display to render at 720. So basically alias HDMI 720, and then what we're doing is we're putting the command that I showed you in the previous section into an alias in our shell configuration file, which means rather than typing out the long command over and over again or copying and paste it, we can just run HDMI-720 and it will set the monitor to 720. So if I come back across to my notes here, what I'm going to now show you is how you can use custom ffmpeg options with OBS Studio for lossless or near lossless video recording. So if I come down here, what you'll see is this kind of little block of code here, and basically what this is OBS Studio has a section in the settings which I'll show you in a moment. When you're in the advanced settings, you have video encoder options that you can specify, and these are ffmpeg options, but they have a particular syntax that isn't an ffmpeg syntax. You can't just put ffmpeg commands into this section. They have to be formatted in a particular way for it to work, and that way is you have to define the option followed by equals and then the value of the option. So for instance here, ffmpeg has a option with the H.264 encoder called constant rate, I forget what it's, CRF, and basically you can set the CRF to 0, and what this will do is this will produce a lossless copy. And the reason why you might want to do this is because if you're recording in OBS Studio and you want to bring the footage into a video editor, you don't want to actually compress the footage. You don't want to have compressed footage going into the video editor, because you're going to compress it when you export it. So you want a lossless copy so that you can maintain quality. And basically the way you do this is using this CRF value of 0, and what this will do is this will produce a video at 720p with a bit rate of about 12,000, which is actually too high to directly upload to YouTube. YouTube recommends maximum, I think, about 6,000, 6.5 meg bit rate for 720p videos. But using this these settings here, which I'll show you how you plug into OBS Studio. This will allow you to create a lossless copy. And first of all, let's say we have the CRF value set to 0, and then we have the preset. You have different presets as to how quickly ffmpeg sort of rendered stuff, like you have fast, faster, ultra fast, and just doing some experiments on my old laptop, I found that the faster preset was better than using an ultra fast. So this is how quickly it's kind of rendering the footage out, and this QP0 equals QP equals 0 is another setting for sort of kind of lossless quality. And lastly, a setting I always use when I'm recording my videos is the pix format equals YUV 420p, and this is necessary because a lot of players, especially things like QuickTime, won't play a video like an MP4 or something without this. So this is how you can create a lossless copy. Now the next thing that you can do is use a CRF value of between 18 and 23, and what this will do is this will have a lower bit rate, but visually it will maintain good quality, and it's sort of indistinguishable kind of to the naked eye, or it's supposed to be, between that and a lossless copy. And the reason why you might want to do this is because as I said, if you record with a CRF value of 0, the bitrate's going to be 12,000, which will be too high for YouTube. But if you use a CRF value of 18, the bitrate for a 720p video is going to come in about 3,000, 3,500, which is well within the limits of the 6 meg recommended settings for YouTube. And basically it's exactly the same command. We're using CRF equals 18 and a preset faster, and exactly the same settings here. And again, the format of the command is completely different from an ffmpeg command, and it's only by chance I actually came across someone mentioning this in some post or other, that you have the you know, the option here followed by equals and then the value. So that's one thing you have to remember. But if I come across and what I'll do is I'll come across and show you the resolution settings in OBS Studio. What I'm doing here is this is the video output settings, and you can see the base canvas resolution. Now normally that would be set to 1920, 1080p, and you would then have the output scale resolution set to 1280 720. Problem with this is you're basically recording a lot of stuff unnecessarily and then processing that screen real estate to scale it down to 720. And what happens then as you scale down from 1080 to 720 is the text looks awful. It will scale really badly, no matter kind of how much bitrate and stuff you throw at it. It just looks terrible. It doesn't look crisp or sharp, and that's just no good if you're recording something that you actually want people to read on the screen and follow along. So what we do is, I say, we first of all we set our external monitor's resolution to 720p. Then in OBS Studio you can create a new profile, or just do this globally, but you come into your settings in the video and you'd set the base canvas resolution and the output scale resolution both set to 1280 by 720. And then the next step is in the output, what you do is you change the output mode to advanced, and in the recording tab you put custom ffmpeg. The type is set to custom output ffmpeg, and you set the output file, and we're going to use a container format of Matroska because it's less liable to corruption than an MP4. Now the next section is the video bitrate. What you want to do is set that to 0, and that's because we're going to be overriding it with the video encoder settings. So you can see after we've set the container format to Matroska, we then set the video bitrate to 0 kilobits and the keyframe to 0, and when we set the keyframe to 0, that will basically just put it to auto. Now you can see down here the video encoder is libx264, and in the video encoder settings, what we've done is we've added those options that I showed you previously, and in this section here we've set the CRF value to 18, and that's going to produce a bit rate of about 3000 at 720p. Now if you wanted to do a lossless video recording that you're going to bring into a video editor, you'd set that CRF value to 0. And the other thing you'd probably want to do is, if you're going to bring this into a video editor, you'd change the audio coder from AAC to recording at WAV, which I think is like S16LE or something. It's listed as. It's not listed specifically as WAV. It's the PCM codec that you want, basically. So if you were going to record the footage and then bring it into a video editor, you'd set the CRF value to 0 and the audio encoder to PCM, because you don't want to edit AAC audio in a video editor. You want to bring it in raw audio and then export it to AAC. So that's basically how you can resize your monitor using xrandr on Linux or Unix, or if you're Mac or Windows, you can do the same thing with your display manager settings. And then we set the base resolution and the scale resolution to 720 as well. And then in our output settings, we can then use ffmpeg options to change the quality using a CRF value, which is a bit easier than randomly putting in 6,000 kilobits, or putting in stuff as numbers as 2,000 kilobits. Is that too much? Whereas you can just use a CRF value, and again the CRF value of 0 would be completely lossless, but otherwise what you can do is you can try a value between 18 and 23, and 23 is going to give you a lower bit rate, but as I said, 18, a CRF value of 18 is only going to give you a bit rate of 3000, which is about half the recommended bit rate that YouTube suggests you use for 720p video. So that's how you can get crisper looking text at 720p on older hardware and do a lossless video recording. And the other thing to remember is that if you're recording as a Matroska file, what you can do afterwards is in OBS Studio, if you go up to the menu, there's a little option that says Remux file or video or something, and you click that and you just select the Matroska file, and it'll remux it into an MP4 file for you, which you can then upload to YouTube. So that's all. Basically I did this video on a 2011 MacBook Air with an i3 processor and 4 gig of RAM, and the reason I came across this sort of issue and decided to have a look at it is because I couldn't record at 1080p and downsize to 720p. I just don't have enough power, so I thought, doesn't it just make more sense to resize your monitor and then record at 720p and not scale it, and that way you're going to get crisp looking text when you're trying to display something in the terminal or in a text editor. So that's basically a couple of tips on using OBS Studio even on low powered hardware.